Chapter 61. The Brown Wizard. After they left the troll cave, Dewey used the Palantir again to search for other troll lairs. Nearby caves had already been cleared by him and Gandalf. The remaining ones were far away, and nobody captured by trolls appeared. After some discussion, they abandoned further pursuit and agreed to head to Rivendell. As the rescuers this time, Gandalf and Dewey's decision carried weight. Thorin, though reluctant, did not press the matter. If anything, the troll ordeal only made him more eager to reach the Lonely Mountain, enter it, and claim the Arkenstone to rally the dwarves. No one objected to the journey to Rivendell. They packed their belongings and left the troll forest, moving eastward. Soon the tale of the trolls' grisly deaths spread among the trolls themselves. A predator that hunted trolls had appeared in the wood, one that ate their hearts and breathed flame, and any troll who met it died. The rumor terrified many. Fearing the monstrous hunter, countless trolls fled into remote mountain caverns and dared not come down. Attacks near the troll forest sharply decreased, and the roads became safer for passing travelers and merchants. Some of the villagers rescued by Dewey and Gandalf took boats from the last great bridge and floated downstream to human settlements in the south. Others crossed the bridge and followed the east-west road westward. The story of the Grey Wizard and the Black-Robed Wizard who slew trolls and saved villagers spread across Eriador. Troll slayers, people called them. Not long after they left the wood, a commotion in the distance put everyone on edge. It turned out to be Radagast the Brown, came barreling up on his wooden sledge pulled by a team of rabbits, moving with astonishing speed through the trees. Gandalf was surprised to see his old friend. "Radagast, what are you doing here?" Radagast was about Gandalf's height, wearing a broad-brimmed brown hat flecked with bird droppings and a long, earth-colored robe streaked with mud, grass, and twigs. He looked disheveled and agitated. "I've been looking for you, Gandalf," he said, breathless. "Something is wrong, very wrong. Mirkwood is ill. A darkness lies over it. Trees are withering, the air fouls, the rivers sicken. Giant spiders have appeared, more than before. I followed their tracks to Dol Guldur, and there I found traces of the necromancer. I found this." He drew from his cloak a leather-wrapped object and handed it to Gandalf. Unwrapping it revealed a jet-black blade that radiated a cold, sinister hatred. "A Morgul blade," Gandalf said, grave. "The Witch King of Angmar's blade." Gandalf's face tightened. He had suspected the Witch King's lingering presence since the Barrow Downs. The sword confirmed a darker truth. The necromancer in Dol Guldur could be no other than Sauron in secret. The implication was chilling. Before he could think further, a chorus of distant howls cut through the air. "Wolves?" Bilbo asked uneasily. The dwarves stiffened. "Wargs," one of them hissed. A huge wolf burst from the trees, leaping high with fangs bared toward the company. Before it landed, Dewey cast a quick spell. The wolf stiffened into stone and crashed down, then Dewey drove his flame sword through it. Another warg rushed out, and Gandalf struck it down with a blow from his warhammer. "Those were scouts," Gandalf warned. "A host of orcs must be close behind." Dori, who looked after the animals and gear, shouted that the rest of the horses had been spooked and bolted. Dewey's little pony, Little Dummy, had remained foolishly calm, carriage still hitched, but one cart could not carry them all. Radagast stepped forward. "I'll draw them off," he said. "You should make for Rivendell while you can." "Those are Gundabad wargs," Gandalf protested. "Radagast, are you certain?" "I have the Rosgobel rabbits," Radagast replied with a wild grin. "They'll do their part. Let me see what they can catch." He patted the nearest rabbit, whipping it into motion. "I'll take a group too," Dewey said. "I'll drive the carriage by myself. If we split them, you'll have a better chance to reach the ford of Bruinen." Radagast looked Dewey over with curious amusement. "And who might you be?" "Do I?" Gandalf said. "The black-robed wizard." He then turned to Dewey with concern. "Are you sure? These are wargs of Gundabad, more dangerous than the roving orcs we've met before." Dewey smiled with steady confidence. "Don't worry, Gandalf, I can hold my own. Draw their attention and run for Rivendell. Once you cross the ford and enter Elven lands, you'll be safe." Chapter 62. Elrond, the wargs and orcs closed in from every side. First to burst from the trees was Radagast the Brown, in his sled drawn by Rosgable rabbits. He charged straight at the enemy, sowed confusion, then darted away into the woods. Almost at once, a carriage tore out of the forest behind him. Duir, black-robed and composed, sent a spell that felled 2 wargs blocking his path, then drove the carriage grandly off in another direction. The little pony that pulled the carriage seemed to carry no weight at all. It tore along with the light vehicle at a brisk, relentless pace. Seeing the company split, the orcs and wargs divided in 2. Hundreds of them scattered after the 2 fleeing figures. Radagast, relying on the astonishing speed of his Rosgable rabbits and his deft handling, threaded the mountains and trees as if over flat ground, skirting peril and toying narrowly with the wargs. Duir's scene was different. The pony was fleet, but not as swift as the wargs. Every time they closed, he hurled a spell to push them back, snatching distance between himself and the pursuing monsters. Time and again, the wargs would surge up, and he would strike them down, only for the survivors to overtake him again. Little by little, the number of pursuers behind the carriage thinned. Wargs are clever, not mere beasts of burden. Their association with orcs is more partnership than slavery. Seeing that their chase of Duir brought no profit, many abandoned the pursuit, heedless of the orcs' curses, and turned elsewhere. That had been Duir's design. He had meant to draw them off, but when the wargs left him, he could not let them go. He wheeled the carriage about and chased the wargs and orcs down instead. "Petrificus totalus," he cried. A warg froze solid. The orc on its back was heaved off by the sudden halt and thrown clear. Duir was about to bind the orc when an arrow flew from afar and pierced the creature's skull, sending him to his end. "Who stole my kill?" Duir searched for the source of the shot. A long, clear horn answered from the distance. The ground trembled as horses thundered nearer. A tall, silver host rode into view, elves in splendid, graceful armor on mighty steeds, swift and lithe as the wind. Their formations moved with precision. Every arrow struck true. Every sword swing severed an orc's head. The elven cavalry were perfection in motion. Against them, the orcs and wargs could not hold. They broke and fled, more than half their number cut down. When the elves halted, they finished off the scattered foes with disciplined calm. A small detachment rode toward Duir. Their leader sat upon a tall white steed, clad in fine armor and a midnight blue war robe. His face bore no obvious age. Black hair flowed down his back, bound by a delicate silver circlet. His gray eyes shone with quiet wisdom and a depth that betrayed much lived experience, an air of nobility and command that inspired respect. "Welcome, guest from afar. May I ask your name?" he said. "Duir, a wizard from the west," Duir answered. "Duir, the black-robed wizard? Friend of the halflings, woodcutter among the Horns, bane of the Barrow-wights. Your name is known even among the elves," the elf said, curiosity and scrutiny mingled in his tone. "And now, I suppose, we should add to that list, enemy of orcs. I felt also that other folk were wary of you. Have you been in the Trollshaws?" the elf added. His gray eyes seemed to pierce to hidden things. "Trolls attacked some nearby villages. Gandalf and I went to the Trollshaws to rescue the folk, and we slew several," Duir replied. "A noble deed," the elf nodded. "So Gandalf came with you?" "We traveled together, but I drew the orcs off, and we were parted." At this, the elf's manner warmed. "If you are Gandalf's friend, come with us." They rode together in a hush. The quiet of the elves felt odd to Duir, who was used to the loud cheer of dwarves. They were 2 extremes indeed. Dwarves boisterous and talkative, elves reserved and almost solemn, like sealed jars of oil. Rivendell lay hidden in a moor of heather, wrapped in steep gullies, forests, marshes, and streams. Its location was secret. The paths into it could not be found without elvish guidance. Duir followed the elven column along a winding, stony track into the canyon. When he entered Rivendell, his breath stopped. He had stepped into a dream lost to time. Meadows of wildflowers, paths of white gravel winding between graceful white buildings that clung to the valley and riverbanks, palaces, towers, bridges, gardens, and terraces set with artful care. All about the valley lay a powerful, subtle enchantment. Magic seemed thick in the air. The realm held a perpetual spring. Life looked fresh and holy. Such a presence could have only one explanation besides Elrond himself, the power of Vilya, the Ring of Air. Elsewhere, after Radagast and Duir had drawn the orcs away, Gandalf led Bilbo and the dwarves through a hidden passage into Rivendell. They emerged across a narrow stone bridge without railings and came to the valley's entrance. An elf descended the steps to meet them. Mithrandir. The greeting was simple. Ah, Lindir, long time, Gandalf replied with warmth. Where is Lord Elrond? I would speak with him. Lord Elrond is not within. Not here, Gandalf asked, surprised. Before Lindir could answer, a horn sounded beyond the entrance, and the elven cavalry rode in across the bridge in ordered ranks. The dwarves stiffened at sight of the armed horsemen. Alert, cried Thorin. Weapons ready. Close ranks. They drew swords and axes, hauled Bilbo into the center, and formed a wary back-to-back circle. The elves, too, were not idle. They looped their mounts about the dwarves, circling with a teasing, provocative air. Duir! I see Duir! Bilbo cried, his eyes lighting up. From within the elven formation came the carriage Duir had been driving. The black-haired elf at the head of the company greeted Gandalf. Mithrandir. Elrond, Gandalf answered with a bow. You have been beyond our borders? Elrond asked. He dismounted, handed his sword to Lindir, and spoke with concern. It is odd that orcs should come so near. Something or someone must have drawn them. He cast a meaning glance at the watchful dwarves. Then his tone shifted. While hunting those orcs, we met one of your companions and invited him here. His hand pointed toward Duir, who had just arrived with the elves. Chapter 63, The Origin of Sting. When Duir stepped down from the carriage, an elf moved forward at once to take care of his horse and the luggage. After thanking him, Duir walked up to Gandalf with a smile. Gandalf, he greeted. Good to see you well, Duir, Gandalf replied cheerfully. I hear you've already met Lord Elrond, so an introduction isn't necessary. Elrond inclined his head. Wizard Duir's skill in magic is remarkable. While we were hunting orcs, I heard he dispatched hundreds of orcs and wargs. I think it won't be long before the name Foe of Orcs is spoken across Eriador. You flatter me, Lord Elrond, Duir protested quickly. There were others who had slain far more orcs. Indeed, this elf lord commanded countless orc-slaying warriors, so he did not presume to accept such a title. After their pleasantries, Elrond turned to Thorin with a polite nod. Welcome, Thorin, son of Thrain. Thorin answered coolly. We have not met before. Elrond smiled. I knew your grandfather Thror when he was king under the mountain. Thorin's tone went cutting. He never once mentioned you. Gandalf rolled his eyes. Duir, too, felt an awkward moment of silence. Thorin's bluntness always seemed to offend. Elrond, with practiced patience, did not take offense. He signaled to the servants in Elvish, Light the fires and bring the wine. We must make a proper welcome for our honored guests. What is he saying? Is he mocking us? Gloin bristled and tried to step forward. The other dwarves shifted as if ready for a fight. No, Master Gloin, he's inviting you to a feast, Gandalf said warily. The dwarves huddled, suspicious and whispering among themselves, debating whether this was a trap. After a short conference, Gloin allowed himself to be placated. Very well, lead the way. At the feast, Elrond, Gandalf, Duir, and Thorin sat together at one table. The dwarves and Bilbo sat at another. Duir looked over at the spread of green dishes, platters of fruits and herbs, not a scrap of meat in sight, and then at the dwarves opposite him, who looked as if they had swallowed their tongues. It was clearly a small insult exacted by the elves. He'd happened upon it by accident. At Duir's table, the mood was pleasant enough, though Thorin kept to himself. But across the hall at Bilbo's table, the scene was livelier. Killy, the youngest of the company, stared unabashedly at an elf playing the harp and even winked. The others broke into laughter, and the noise drew glances from Elrond and the high table. Halfway through the meal, Gandalf told Elrond about the troll they had encountered and placed his sword in front of him, asking if Elrond could identify it. Elrond took the blade and, with a look of recognition, said, Glamdring, Foehammer, the sword of Turgon of Gondolin, forged in the First Age for war against the orcs. You found it? Gandalf sounded pleased. It was given to me, Gandalf corrected with a bright smile. Duir found it and handed it to me. Elrond turned to Duir with new interest and warmth. That is a rare friendship. Duir felt momentarily embarrassed and a little shy of the attention. Elrond then examined Thorin's sword as well and offered a courteous wish that Orcrist might serve him well. Seeing this, Bilbo, a little awkward, fished his short sword out and lifted it up. Balin snorted beside him. Don't be ridiculous. A sword only earns a name through famed deeds. That little thing's not a sword, it's a letter opener. Disappointed, Bilbo put Sting away. Dwyer, however, leaned forward. Bilbo, bring your elvish blade here. Lord Elrond might know where it came from. Bilbo hesitated. Compared to the gleaming gem-set Glamdring and Orcrist, his short blade looked plain and unimpressive. But Elrond, intrigued by Dwyer's prompting, turned his gaze to Bilbo and asked, "Another elven blade? May I see it?" Under the eyes of the whole hall, Bilbo stood and laid his short sword before Elrond. Elrond drew it from its leather sheath and examined it carefully. Surprise crossed his face. Everyone grew curious. Could the modest blade really have some notable history? "Lord Elrond, do you know what this is?" Gandalf asked. Elrond's expression grew serious and complex. This blade, technically a dagger by its size, has an extraordinary history. It once belonged to Glorfindel, Lord of the House of the Golden Flower of Gondolin. "I?" Gandalf's surprise was plain. "You mean the dagger that slew the Balrog?" Elrond nodded and told them the tale. Glorfindel had been a noble Noldor, one of the captains of Gondolin. In the year 510 of the First Age, Morgoth's host fell upon Gondolin. The enemy threw great forces against the city, dragons, Balrogs, wolves, and vast numbers of orcs, and Gondolin was betrayed and overwhelmed. A scant few escaped. Passing through the Crissaegrim, they were ambushed by orcs, and a terrible Balrog confronted them. Glorfindel stayed to cover the fleeing people. He fought the Balrog, which lashed him with a fiery whip and dragged him over a cliff. In the struggle, he drove his dagger deep into the Balrog's belly, slaying it, but he himself perished on the cliff. And the short blade in Bilbo's hand was that dagger, the very weapon that had once killed a Balrog. A murmur ran through the hall. All eyes fell on Bilbo's modest sword with renewed respect. Dwyer felt his own surprise deepen. He had never imagined Bilbo's sting had such a storied past. Elrond went on. The Glorfindel who had slain the Balrog died in Gondolin, but he was later re-embodied by the Valar and returned to Middle-earth. In the Second Age and later he came among the deep and powerful elves who resisted Sauron. In Rivendell, Glorfindel now lived once more, and he counted among the most potent of Elendil's allies. That presented a curious question. The former and the present owner of the dagger now resided in Rivendell. Should the blade be returned to its original owner, Glorfindel, or remain with Bilbo, who had it in his possession and had come by it by chance? Even Elrond admitted it was a dilemma. He would ask Glorfindel himself and hear his counsel. Chapter 64, The Book of Spells. Glorfindel entered like a shaft of light, tall and slender, with a handsome face, golden hair that seemed to glow, keen bright eyes, and a voice as melodious as a song. He carried the air of a learned elven sage more than that of a warrior. Born in the age of the two trees and bathed in their light, he radiated a holy brilliance that made him almost angelic. Living mostly in seclusion at Rivendell, he rarely received guests. He spent his days in the library or in his own house. So his appearance at the feast, prompted by news that his long-lost dagger had turned up, was remarkable. "Elrond," he greeted. "Mithrandir, it has been a long time," Elrond answered. Glorfindel bowed with the same easy grace he had worn for ages, then turned to Gandalf. "Glorfindel, my friend, your radiance is unchanged." Gandalf returned the greeting with pleasure. He clearly knew the Lord of the Golden Flower well. The whole hall fell into a hush at the sight of the reborn elf. Even the normally boisterous dwarves went quiet. Dewey found himself staring, awed. Glorfindel had died gloriously in the First Age and had been reborn. His power was said to be on a level approaching that of a Maya. He was easily among the most formidable elves in Middle-earth. Had beings like him been free to wield their full might in the struggle against Sauron, the Dark Lord might not have endured so long. After the formalities, Glorfindel's gaze fell to the dagger in Bilbo's hand. "May I see it?" he asked. Of course," Bilbo answered, a little awkwardly, and handed it over. Glorfindel took the dagger with gentle care. Memories and a profound sorrow crossed his features. "I always believed it had fallen with the Balrog into the abyss," he murmured. "I never thought I would see it again." Bilbo's unease, at the idea of returning such a thing to its former owner, was plain. Glorfindel must have read it in his face, for a small, kindly smile flickered across his features. To everyone's surprise, he handed the dagger back. "I have been without it for countless years," he said. "But if fate brought it to you, then it is yours. May it serve you well." "Thank you," Bilbo breathed, visibly relieved. He had expected Glorfindel to reclaim his weapon. He had not expected the elf to refuse it. The dagger had been a gift from Dewey, and Bilbo did not wish to lose it. Glorfindel did not linger. After saying his farewells, he departed, leaving Bilbo the center of attention. The dagger, rumored to have killed a Balrog and once carried by Glorfindel himself, made Bilbo a magnet for envy. Dewey, too, was pleased for Bilbo. What pleased him more was that his system finally reacted. Hogwarts sign-in system. Location Rivendell. Do you wish to sign in? Sign in, Dewey thought silently, keeping his face impassive. Sign in successful. Congratulations, you have obtained the first edition of the Book of Spells. A thick spell book, visible only to him, manifested before his eyes. The Book of Spells was an earlier work by Miranda Goshawk, the predecessor to her standard Book of Spells series, the Hogwarts Charms textbooks. It was, in essence, an encyclopedia of magic, a compendium of spells known across the wizarding world. When it had first appeared, the Ministry of Magic suppressed parts of it, deeming many entries too dangerous for general publication. At the Ministry's insistence, curses and some highly destructive spells were excised. Later, Miranda reworked the material and divided it into the separate standard Book of Spells volumes for 1st through 7th years. The Book of Spells, in its original form, contained far more than the sanitized textbooks. Dewey felt a flush of relief. Up to now, his repertoire had been largely defensive. He had lacked reliable ways to finish an opponent quickly. This book was exactly what he needed. If he weren't still at the feast, he would have slipped away to study it at once. Now, however, he had to wait. The banquet itself was tapering into chaos. The dwarves, having drunk too freely, had abandoned decorum. To the elves, their loud singing and clattering noises sounded like a funeral dirge. Beaufort leapt onto a table and began to sing in Dwarvish, and the rest joined in with drums, spoons, and pots, throwing food at one another and turning the feast into a raucous celebration. The elves around them exchanged dismayed glances. Elrond frowned slightly. His upbringing forbade a remonstration, but he said nothing. Gandalf, who had just spoken of the dwarves as noble descendants of Durin, looked distinctly embarrassed, as if he wished he had not praised them so highly. Dewey could only grimace inwardly, wishing the banquet would end so he could study his new book in peace. Afterward, Gandalf and Elrond had urgent matters to discuss. The dwarves, still drunk, stayed in the hall. Bilbo wanted to wander through Rivendell. Dewey found a quiet terrace and settled himself there, though his eyes never left the Book of Spells hovering in front of him. It contained everything from basic charms to advanced magic. He flipped through descriptions of practical spells and complex enchantments, the undetectable extension charm, the Patronus charm, and many others. What captured him most were the offensive spells and the curses the Ministry had excised. Among the offensive spells was the Exploding Bolt, a deadly enchantment that could cause an object to detonate with the force of many kilograms of TNT. Peter Pettigrew had used it to blow up an entire street in one account. There were also the Sand Blast spell, the Shattering Charm, the Arrow Shooting spell, and other powerful assaults. The curses ranged from nasty nuisances, the Stinging Hex, the Nail-Growing Curse, the Bone-Stretching Hex, to grievous dark arts, the Gutting Curse, and the Extraction Charm. All of them, used properly, could be devastating. For now, Dewey chose to tackle one spell that interested him above the rest, the Patronus Charm. Expecto Patronum, the book explained, produced a concentrated positive force in the form of an animal Patronus. It was an advanced white magic charm used to repel dark entities, creatures like Lethifolds and Dementors. Middle-earth had no Dementors, but it had its own shadow foes, the Wights and the Nazgul. Such creatures, steeped in darkness, should be vulnerable to a pure, light-based charm. If he could master a corporeal Patronus, Dewey thought, confronting wights or ringwraiths in the future would be far less perilous. Dewey read the book's explanation of the Patronus charm carefully. Once he felt he understood it, he tried to cast the spell. Expecto Patronum. He concentrated on happy memories and waved his wand. Silver mist sprayed from the tip, but it remained only a cloud, unable to take shape. It quickly dispersed as his attention wavered. He wasn't discouraged and tried again. This time more silver mist poured forth, coalescing into a large, dazzling glow, a luminous cocoon, as if something were forming inside. Yet the image of a Patronus was slow to resolve. Dewey stopped, withdrew his magic, and thought it over. He had recalled every joyful memory he could, but still the Patronus would not fully form. What else did the charm require? Then realization lit him up. The charm's name, Patronus, implied protection. In addition to happy memories, the caster needed a firm will to protect. The book had only emphasized memory. He had overlooked the force of intent. Armed with that insight, he didn't hesitate. Expecto Patronum. Happy memories flashed, this life, a previous one, and then the thought of what he, Bilbo, and Gandalf were about to face. A fierce desire welled up in him, that he and those he cared for would survive. Silver mist gushed from the wand, more and more, swallowing the space around him in a vast white. Finally, the mist condensed into a large silver-white bird. It beat its wings and circled Dewar, radiating a bright, hopeful presence that made anyone nearby feel uplifted. "Is this an owl?" he murmured. The Patronus's large eyes and ear-like tufts made the image unmistakably owl-like. When Dewar reached out, the owl flew down and lit on his arm. It had no weight. It rubbed its beak against his face with a lively, affectionate air. "What exquisite magic," a voice said behind him. Dewar turned to see two young elves approaching. They were handsome and identical in build and features. Only one wore a golden circlet and the other a silver one. Both watched the silver, translucent owl on his arm with admiration and wonder. "Welcome, traveler," the elf with the golden circlet said. "We are the sons of Elrond. I am Elrohir." "My name is Eladan," the other added with a polite nod. Dewar blinked in surprise. Elrond's twins. He had not expected to meet them so soon and bowed slightly. "I am the wizard Dewar from Weathertop." "We have long heard of you, black-robed Dewar," Elrohir said with a smile. "Your deeds are talked of even in the wilds, the Horn Feller, the bane of the Gujhang corpse demon, the slayer of trolls, the foe of orcs, and the one who restored Amansul on Weathertop overnight. Such feats are known among the elves as well," Eladan added. Dewar smiled, embarrassed. "Those tales are exaggerated." "There is no need for false modesty," Elrohir replied, his clear blue eyes appraising him. "I can tell your accomplishments are genuine. They deserve praise." Dewar wondered at Elrohir's discernment. Eladan, meanwhile, had been eyeing the wand in Duir's hand with curiosity. "Wizard Dewar, the staff in your hand is unlike those we see. May I?" he asked. "It is a wand, not like the staves Gandalf bears," Dewar explained. He was curious in turn. Could elves use such a wand? He knew the elves were a magical people, but their magic mostly manifested in crafted objects, things like the Silmarils, the Three Rings, or famed blades such as Glamdring and Bilbo's dagger. Only high elves like Elrond and Galadriel, with their long experience, shaped spells of great power. Most elves fought with bows and swords. Their magic showed in their bodies and their perception of the world rather than in spoken charms. Still, Dewar handed the wand to Eladan and taught him a simple spell. Lumos. Eladan murmured the word and flicked the wand. A faint white light bloomed at its tip. The three of them stared, eyes wide. "I did it!" Eladan breathed, excitement brightening his features. For young elves without years of arcanum to their name, casting a spell was an extraordinary thing. Elrohir tried as well, and likewise managed to make the wand's tip glow. What a marvelous feeling! "Though it seems this wand resists us somewhat," Elrohir observed as he returned it, "and so it is harder for us than it would be for a wizard." Dewar was no less surprised. He had not expected them to succeed. If they had their own wands, these elves might well be able to cast spells on their own. He pictured for a moment a battlefield where elves, wands raised, hurled charms like Expelliarmus and Petrificus Totalis, and routed an orc host. The image made him grin and then shake his head. The notion felt oddly out of place, too strange for Middle-earth style. Farther off, on another terrace, Elrond and Gandalf had watched the whole episode. Gandalf chuckled. "And what do you think, Lord Elrond? Has my companion been surprising?" "It has indeed been a great surprise," Elrond said, breathing deep as his gaze lingered on the distant figures with clear appreciation. "I think I must have a proper conversation with this young wizard." Chapter 66, Making Wands for Elves. Dewar had been invited to Rivendell by Lindir, Elrond's herald, and arrived with Elrohir and Eladan. Gandalf was already there in the house of Elrond. The two elven brothers bowed to their lord. Elrond returned their greeting with a fond nod. His eyes showed the deep love of a father. He and Celebrian had 3 children. 2 sons and a daughter. Celebrian had been waylaid by orcs in the Redhorn Pass while traveling to Lothlorien, and though Elrohir and Eladon had braved the orc lairs of the Misty Mountains to rescue her, the wounds to her spirit were grave. She could only be healed by sailing west to Valinor. Their daughter Arwen was left in the care of her mother's parents, Celeborn and Galadriel, in Lothlorien, and so Elrond had his twin sons with him in Rivendell. "Lord Elrond," Duir said after bowing, "what would you have of me?" "Wizard Duir," Elrond replied, "may I see your wand?" Duir glanced at Gandalf, who stood beside him and gave an encouraging smile. Duir surrendered the wand without hesitation. Elrond took it, turning it over in his hands with growing interest. "An extraordinary device," he murmured. "Magic wood joined with enchanted materials, so simple, yet yielding unusual effects." "You used Huorn willow for the shaft, I think. And the core?" "A strand of Goldberry's hair and a thread from Tom Bombadil's beard," Duir answered. Elrond's surprise deepened. He raised the wand and made a graceful pass. Outside, the waterfall that framed Rivendell was lifted by an eddy of wind, condensed into a towering waterhorse that thundered through the hall, bringing a cool spray of mist, then bounded back out and plunged down into the valley below. "Very good," Elrond said with satisfaction. "Though your wand does not greatly increase raw power, it is an excellent focus. Even young elves could learn to cast worthy spells with it." He handed the wand back. "Wizard Duir, would you be willing to make wands for us?" Duir hesitated. "I would, Lord Elrond, but wandcraft takes time, and my companions and I are now on an expedition. I cannot promise much spare time." Gandalf said nothing, but his expression was unreadable. Elrond waved a hand. "Time is no burden to us. We may wait, years, decades, even centuries if needs must." Duir started at the reminder of Elrond's longevity. "It need not be that long," he said quickly. "When this mission is done, I can make wands for Rivendell." "How many do you require?" Elrond asked. A pleased smile crossed Elrond's face when Duir agreed. "Only 2, he said. "Wands for my sons." Relief washed over Duir. "That I can do." "You will make them," Elrond continued, "but the magical wood and materials must be provided by us. I will not require you to procure them." After a beat, Elrond returned the courtesy. "Wizard Duir, you have aided us. What would you ask in return?" Before Duir could answer, Gandalf cleared his throat and spoke for him. "Lord Elrond, Duir would wish for a staff of his own. He lacks the magic gem for the core. Do you know of any such gems?" Duir reddened. He had not expected Gandalf to put the question so bluntly, and feared Elrond might think the proposal presumptuous. Magic gems were priceless. Possessing one would far outvalue any commission. But Elrond did not bristle. He shook his head mildly. "Rivendell does not collect such things. I have none of what you seek. Yet Lady Galadriel in Lothlorien keeps many rare gems. I will speak with her and tell of your wish. Whether she will grant one, I cannot promise." He looked to Gandalf. "And you, Gandalf, have dealings with Galadriel. Perhaps you can assist." Gandalf inclined his head in agreement. Duir felt both embarrassed and grateful. He had promised Gandalf a staff. He had carved a shaft of vine wood, but the proper core eluded him. In the troll forest, he had tried a troll's nerve as a substitute, but it was ill-suited for Gandalf. The conversation shifted then, as other matters could not be kept from Elrond's notice. Though Thorin and his company had tried to keep their purpose secret, Elrond's long memory and Gandalf's candor left little hidden. Gandalf had even brought Thorin to Rivendell, intending that Elrond might read the map. Thorin stubbornly resisted. "Our affairs do not concern the elves," he said, refusing to show the map. Gandalf's temper flared. "Thorin, set aside your dwarven obstinacy and show the map to Lord Elrond." "This map is my people's heirloom. It is my charge to keep its secrets," Thorin answered heartily. "Don't call it stubbornness," Gandalf shot back. "Your pride may undo you. Before you stands one of the few who can read that map. Show him." For a long moment they stood at an impasse, Thorin proud and rigid, Gandalf insistent. Duir and Elrond watched quietly. Finally, Thorin lowered his head. From his breast he drew the map and handed it to Elrond. Elrond ignored Thorin's sour look and set himself to study the parchment with careful, patient attention. Chapter 67. Galadriel Elrond, one of the wisest of the elves in Middle-earth, had no trouble deciphering the map. He recognized at a glance the ancient dwarven secret script, moon letters, and knew how they worked. Moon letters appear only by moonlight. They must match the phase and season of the moon on the night they were written. These were inscribed on Midsummer's Eve under a new crescent moon nearly 200 years ago. Your visit to Rivendell this time is fated, Elrond said, turning to Thorin. Fate favors you, Thorin Oakenshield, for tonight the same moonlight falls. He led them to a crystal platform, laid the map upon it, and let the refracted moonlight reveal the script. The hidden words glimmered. Stand by the gray stone when the thrush knocks, and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole. Thorin's arrogance faded at the words. He leaned over the map, brow furrowed. The message could not have been clearer. They had to reach the lonely mountain by Durin's day, and wait for the last light to fall upon the keyhole so that the key could open the hidden entrance. Thorin, having finally learned how to enter the mountain, was eager to leave at once and reach Erebor before Durin's day. But Gandalf insisted they remain in Rivendell a few days longer. He had summoned the White Council to discuss the appearance of the Witch King of Angmar and the Necromancer in Dol Guldur. Thorin bristled at the delay. He cared for the reclaiming of the mountain alone and resented any distractions, and he prepared to break away from Gandalf and lead his company on southward. Duir, meanwhile, had spent the intervening days in Elrond's household with Elrohir and Elladan. Under their guidance, he visited gardens, libraries, and forges, and met a young boy with the elvish name Estel, the future King Elessar, Aragorn, who was only 10 then. Looking at the boy who was like a brother to Elrohir and Elladan, Duir thought of Arwen far away in Lothlorien, and wondered how the brothers would react if they knew he would one day marry their sister, and that she would give up her immortality for him. When the White Council was to assemble, Duir had intended to depart with the dwarves, but Gandalf came to him and asked him to attend. Gandalf, is that proper? Duir asked. He was not a member of the White Council. What place had he at its meeting? This meeting requires your presence, Gandalf said, and there are matters that will be more persuasive if shown by both you and me. Gandalf's insistence left Duir with little choice, and he was curious to meet the assembled lords anyway. On a moonlit night, he followed Gandalf up to the highest garden of Rivendell and into a stone pavilion. There, beneath the clear light, stood a tall, incomparably fair elf. She seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, noble and serene. Her robe was white and splendid, her hair a cascade of golden light touched with silver, and her eyes were deep and terrible with wisdom, as if they looked straight into the soul. Mithrandir, she said, and her smile brightened the night. Lady Galadriel, Gandalf replied. Years may have changed me, but they have not changed the Lady of Lorien. Galadriel's smile deepened. She was more dazzling than the moon. Duir could not take his eyes off her. She was the most beautiful elf he had ever seen, a beauty beyond mortal measure, every gesture and smile full of grace. He was about to let his thoughts wander. Gandalf's warmth toward her, the easy intimacy of their greeting, and felt a sudden prickle of unease, as if she had read where his thoughts were going. She turned her gaze toward him. A voice echoed in Duir's mind. Young wizard, why do you not meet my eyes? Duir's heart leapt. Telepathy. He steadied himself and bowed to break the immediacy of her scrutiny. Gandalf stepped forward to introduce him. Lady Galadriel, this is Duir, the black-robed wizard, my companion. Even I cannot match his gifts and his knowledge of the arts. Greetings, Lady Galadriel, Duir said aloud, formal and respectful. May the light of the stars be upon you. Galadriel regarded him with a curious, appraising look. The voice came again in his mind, mildly teasing. Could it be you hide a secret and do not wish me to see it? Flushing, Duir answered silently, striving for sincerity. Of course not, Lady Galadriel. I simply find your eyes like the star of Arendil, so bright they shame me. Her expression softened into pleasure. Clever young wizard, she said in his mind. You have a smooth tongue. She fell silent in his thoughts. Then she spoke aloud. Once this journey is complete, you are welcome to visit Lorien. To Duir's astonishment, she extended a slender hand. In her palm lay a green gem that shone from within like an ember of living light. This is, he began. The Elessar, she answered. The elf stone. It holds the light of the sun and may serve as the heart of a staff. Duir felt the warmth and power thrum beneath his skin. The stone was more precious than any he had seen. He remembered, faintly and with a pang, that this gem would later be given by Galadriel to Aragorn as a token from Arwen. It was in later days called the Elfstone. Now, here it was in his hand, offered unexpectedly. Even Elrond and Gandalf had looked surprised. "Take it," Galadriel said quietly, but with an authority that left him no time to hesitate. The gem was warm and sun-like in his palm, its light steady and full. She paused, then added, "But I have a condition." Duer looked up, relieved to have a request rather than a demand. "What do you ask?" "I would have you craft a staff for Arwen." Chapter 68. The White Council. What kind of request was this? Dewey was speechless. A request for a staff for an elf. Wasn't that essentially handing it away? Then, to his surprise, Galadriel gently plucked a strand of her hair. A bright, golden lock threaded with silver light landed in his palm. "Elrond told me the components needed for the staves," she said. "Let these be the cores for Arwen and her kin." Dewey stared at the hair as if stars were trapped in it. The tales had not lied. Galadriel's hair was a thing even Fëanor had once coveted. As someone who had bathed in the light of the two trees and the most potent of the elves of Middle-earth, even a few strands of her hair brimmed with uncanny power. He felt equal parts astonished and honored. The lock contained 5 distinct hairs. 3 could become the staves for Elrohir, Eladon, and Arwen. 1 might be tried for Gandalf's staff. The last was, Galadriel said, a gift. Dewey plucked a nearby leaf, and with a practiced twist of transfiguration, turned it into a fine silk handkerchief. He wrapped the precious hairs carefully, tucked them close to his chest, and bowed to Galadriel with solemn respect. "My lady, you have my word. I will craft powerful staves for Princess Arwen and her brothers." Galadriel smiled, pleased. But pleasant moments often invite interruption. A dry, mocking voice called out from nearby. A tall, slim man in white robes walked forward, leaning on a staff, his expression cool and superior. Gandalf's warm face fell at once, but he forced a smile and nodded. "Saruman, it has been some time." Gandalf then introduced Dewey. "This is my friend, the black-robed wizard Dewyer. He is not irrelevant. I brought him for a reason." "Black-robed wizard?" Saruman cut him off, his sharp eyes traveling over Dewey with obvious disdain. "Gandalf, when did you begin consorting with such third-rate sorcerers? A few parlor tricks, and you earn a title." Gandalf drew a breath and shot Dewey an apologetic look. Saruman and he were perpetual rivals, and Dewey had walked ungracefully into the crossfire. Dewey barely flinched. He fixed his gaze on Saruman without a hint of fear. "Wizard is a title I earned in the fields of Eriador," Dewey said evenly. "By driving off corpse demons, slaying trolls and orcs. The people gave it to me. I doubt you have the right to judge that." He had already seen the end Saruman would meet. Irritation and fear belonged to others. Saruman, the only white-robed wizard who had come to Middle-earth of his own accord, held the highest status among the Istari here and led the White Council. But he was not above pettiness. Ever since Círdan had entrusted Narya, the Ring of Fire, to Gandalf instead of him, Saruman had grown openly jealous. He had even toyed with the idea of forging a ring of power that might surpass the elven rings. He lacked Sauron's mastery of smithcraft, and so turned his attention to the One Ring, once searching the Anduin for it in secret. He had not yet fallen outright, but the Palantir at his belt hinted at dangerous connections. Dewey felt no reason to coddle him. Saruman's displeasure deepened at Dewey's rebuke, but bound by his role, he did not strike back. He merely said coldly, "Irrelevant people should leave. This is no place for you." "Gandalf invited Dew," Gandalf replied gravely. "He is relevant. He witnessed what I will speak of, the Nazgul. He is a capable ally." Saruman laughed. "Nazgul? Gandalf, you jest. The Nazgul vanished with Sauron's fall. You claim you and this third-rate wizard have seen them?" Gandalf's hand went to his cloak. "Not long ago, passing through the Barrow Downs, we encountered the Witch King of Angmar. He commanded a corpse demon. Radagast has also reported a necromancer stirring in Dol Guldur. A relic of Mordor, a Morgul blade, was found." He produced the blade and set it on a low stone between them. A chill seemed to gather around it. The metal drank light and exhaled darkness. Elrond and Galadriel, who had remained composed, both stiffened. "This sword was forged for the Witch King of Angmar," Galadriel said softly. "When Angmar fell, the men of the north sealed his body and possessions in the high hills of Rudor, buried under stone. No one was meant to see them again. Elrond's brow knit. Impossible. That tomb was bound with powerful spells. How could the sword have emerged? Seals do not simply break, Gandalf agreed. But what if someone can call him forth? We both know who can command such things, Brang. If that one so wills, he can summon them wherever they lie. Sauron is defeated and cannot return, Saruman snapped. The One Ring is lost in the Anduin, perhaps washed into the sea. He cannot rise. The Witch King is standing and wielding strength, Gandalf said, his voice flat. Du met him on the Barrow Downs. We later encountered an army of corpse demons under his command on the Great East Road. We saw it ourselves. This is merely your account, Saruman countered, glancing again at Dewey with a sneer. And the word of a so-called wizard of no great renown is hardly evidence. Dewey bristled. He had no taste for being insulted for others' jealousies. If Saruman demands more proof, he said, I can provide it, but you may not be willing to acknowledge it when you see it. At those words, every eye turned to him. Even Gandalf looked surprised. Dewey felt the weight of their gazes, and though Saruman's contempt had not lessened, curiosity and unease had begun to spread through the gathering. Chapter 69. Leaving Rivendell. You? How can you prove it? Saruman demanded, his eyes sharp with suspicion. I have arts that can extract memories, my own and others. Dewey pressed his wand to his temple, recalling the moments in question, and murmured an incantation. A silver filigree of memory unspooled from his brow and arced toward his hand. Once a memory is removed, it can only be shown by implanting it into another mind or by placing it in a suitable receptacle. A pensieve, though none were at hand, and none among them would lightly let him meddle with their heads. Dewey, however, had another option. Lady Galadriel, he said, I have heard you can make a water mirror that reveals past and future. Would you make a vessel here that can hold this memory so all may see? As you wish. Galadriel did not refuse. She lifted a wine jug from the table, scooped a measure of the clear river water, and poured it onto the stone beside them. The water shimmered and took on a light not of the day, starlit and sharp. A perfect, lucid mirror formed on the stone. At her nod, Dewey let the silver thread fall from his wand into the water. The memory braided into the surface with a ripple, and the mirror opened. They watched in silence as Dewey's recalled scenes unfolded. His first encounter with a body possessed by the Witch King in the Barrow Downs, the company ambushed by hundreds of wights upon the road, Gandalf clashing with the Witch King in a ghastly duel. Every face nearby turned grave as the images played. Even Saruman, stubborn and loath to admit error, fell silent. The truth was plain. All present, save Dewey, were those of great learning and power. They recognized the figure in the mirror for what it was, the Witch King of Angmar. Saruman would not yield easily. Even if this is the Witch King, he said stiffly, that does not prove Sauron has returned. When the One Ring was cut from him, his bodily form was destroyed. A spirit alone is hardly a threat. And without the One Ring, he can never regain his former might, he added. Elrond and Galadriel remained quiet, but they stood near Gandalf, their silence making their sympathies clear. Saruman's isolation only deepened his anger. He had long expected to lead the White Council, and he now found himself increasingly unsupported. He switched tack with false civility. Leaving aside the Nazgul, there is the matter of the dwarves. Gandalf, you owe us an explanation. You meddle where there is no need, Saruman went on. We all know what lies in the Lonely Mountain, yet you insist on waking that great dragon. You court trouble. I cannot agree, Gandalf replied. Smaug answers to no one. If he were to ally with the Orcs, the balance of power in Middle-earth would be thrown into chaos. Gandalf argued that only by allowing the dwarves to reclaim Erebor could the forces of the world be checked against the darkness in the east. Their argument was interrupted by Lindir, Elrond's steward, who arrived with news. Thorin Oakenshield had left Rivendell at dawn with his dwarves and Bilbo. Lindir's tone held a faint relief. The dwarves had been a particular trouble in the haven, consuming food and wine, turning musical instruments into fuel, making a constant clamor, and even bathing in the elves' fountains. Elrond, bound by courtesy to his guests, had taken no offense, but their departure made Rivendell seem ready for a celebration. The White Council broke up without a firm decision. Though Elrond and Galadriel had sided with Gandalf in private, neither dared openly oppose Saruman's authority. The proposal that the council strike Dol Guldur together found no unanimous support. Gandalf, frustrated, resolved to go to Dol Guldur alone at first, to learn whether Sauron truly hid there. Before leaving Rivendell, Dewey asked and received Elrond's permission to enchant one of the hearths, making it a node for a flue connection to the Weathertop Tower. He gifted Elrond a small bag of flue powder, enough for 10 flights by one person, and as he planned to cross the treacherous Misty Mountains, he left his carriage and the pony Little Dull in the elves' care. Then he and Gandalf set out on foot, following the direction Thorin's company had taken the day before. They were in no great haste. Dewey carried a palantir, and he was confident he could find Thorin if needed. Sitting upon a weathered rock, Gandalf drew thoughtfully on his pipe. "Where are they now?" he asked. "Let me see." Dewey reached into his small leather pouch and drew out a crystal globe that seemed far too large to have come from such a small bag. The ball glowed with inner light. He peered into it and frowned. "They are nearing the high pass. We might take some time to catch them." He slipped the palantir back into the pouch and drew out a water bottle to drink. Gandalf watched him with a mixture of awe and mischief. "Your craft astonishes me," he said. "It is like space magic." "It isn't true spatial magic," Dewey corrected. "It's the undetectable extension charm, a way to enlarge the inner space of an object without changing its outside. The Book of Spells records it. Wizards' trunks, magical tents, pocketed hideouts, many things use the charm. It's difficult to master. I practiced long before I could make a stable interior of more than 2 meters across inside a small pouch. It has made travel much simpler." He looked pleased. All the items from his carriage, his sword, dagger, and other gear, fit inside that little bag. Apart from his wand, he traveled light. Gandalf shook his head with a smile. "We draw on the power of the world," he said, "but your art seems an expression of the self, willing something into being. It is beyond us, though small now, it holds great promise." He reached into his own pouch and pulled out a pipe, rubbing his hands together. "By the way, you now have the elven gem from Lady Galadriel. You can begin to shape your own staff. Decide on the wood and tell me when you are ready. I will see to making it for you." They fell into a quiet stride, the mountains before them, and the road of Thorin and company spread out like a promise. Chapter 70. Rock Giant Dewey hesitated. For a staff, he already had a large section of Willowheart, which was the most suitable magic wood he'd found so far, but it was not necessarily the best. Now that he had precious magic gems like the elf gem, he wanted a staff made from a wood with far stronger magic. Willowheart felt a little ordinary beside such treasures. "Gandalf," he asked, "you travel widely. Do you have any recommendations for staff materials?" Gandalf considered a moment. "Of the trees with the strongest magic in Middle-earth, the Ents are among the foremost. They are the shepherds of trees, created by Yavanna. Even the Huorns of the Old Forest answer to them. Radagast is on good terms with the Ents of Fangorn. Perhaps he could help you obtain a branch from one. Next are the Malorn of Lothlorien, trees of a divine sort, descendants of the 2 trees of Valinor. They are steeped in power. Lady Galadriel brought Malorn seeds to Lorien long ago. That is why it is called the Golden Wood. To take a Malorn branch for a staff, you would need Galadriel's permission. There is one rarer tree still, the White Tree, a descendant of the Silver Tree, the symbol of Númenor and Gondor. One stands in Minas Tirith, though it has already withered." Dewey weighed the options. Excluding the near-mythic White Tree, the Ents and the Malorn were possibilities. The Malorn seemed the easier path. Galadriel had already invited him to Lorien and promised a wand for Arwen. The Ents of Fangorn, however, were known for ill temper, and their kin, the Huorns of the Old Forest, had a history of hostility. He decided to postpone the decision until after the journey to the Lonely Mountain. There was another staff matter on his mind. He had promised to make a wand for Gandalf. The shaft was ready. Only the core remained. Galadriel had given him 5 strands of hair, each suffused with magic and the light of the 2 trees. They were potent, the ideal material for a core. 3 were from the siblings Elrohir, Eladon, and Arwen. Of the remaining 2, one had been tested as a core for Gandalf's staff, but proved incompatible. Like the rings the elves wore, some magics do not blend. Gandalf's nature leaned to fire, Galadriel's to waters. He had to set those strands aside, tucking them into his pocket with a rueful smile. Galadriel's hair bore her blessing, resistance against darkness and protection of the mind. The greatest danger from Sauron was not only his power to destroy, but his power to corrupt thought. The 9 Nazgul had been human kings until the rings warped them into servants of shadow. Even a Maya like Gandalf would not touch the One Ring. Dewey knew that with his present strength and will, he could not resist direct mind corruption from Sauron. With Galadriel's hair, he might. Pressed by the Palantir, Dewey and Gandalf hurried toward the high pass in the Misty Mountains. Halfway there, a thunderstorm rolled up from the peaks. "Protego," Dewey called, and cast a protective ward over himself and Gandalf. Rain bounced off them as if from an invisible shield. Neither man was wet. "Good thing for your craft?" Gandalf said wryly. "Thorin and the others are probably soaked through." Gandalf looked up anxiously toward the high pass. "Giants are said to range these heights. I hope our folk don't run into them. If they do, it would be a landslide and they may not get out alive." Dewey handed Gandalf the Palantir. "Look," he said. Gandalf peered into the Seeing Stone. The image that unfolded chilled him. Rock giants vast as mountains were hurling enormous boulders, their play creating avalanches and thunder. Thorin and the others crouched like ants, pressed into crevices between rocks, dodging falling stones. So far, by fortunate chance, none had been crushed. "We must hurry," Gandalf said. "If we do not reach them before the giants tire of their sport, they may be buried." They ran. Dewey cast spells to lighten their step and dispel fatigue. Gandalf's Ring of Fire dispelled exhaustion. They scarcely stopped for hours and finally reached the high pass. Up close, the giants were more terrifying than any picture. Each stood over 1,000 feet tall, larger than Weathertop's tower, their torsos vanishing into the clouds. It was their movements that churned the sky and called down the thunder. Rock giants preferred the mountains and slept for centuries. They were neutral in the wars of Middle-earth, but their size made them a danger to anyone below. "Protego!" Dewey shouted again as a volley of shattered rock rained down. Their wards shimmered and took the blows, but they pushed forward through a storm of debris. The giants were still idly tossing stones, heedless of the lives in the ravines beneath them. Gandalf's face tightened. "These naughty fellows play without a thought for those underfoot," he muttered. He lifted his staff and struck the air. Light flared and his voice rolled out like thunder. "Quiet down, you rascals! Cease your games!" The giants paused. Slowly they bent their great heads and peered down, curious. For a moment it seemed Gandalf's rebuke had worked. He scolded them in an upright, official tone, more like a headmaster than a wizard. Dewey looked from the motionless giants to Gandalf and felt some comfort. For a heartbeat, it appeared the danger had passed. Then Dewey murmured anxiously, "Gandalf, are you sure this will hold?" "I don't know. I'm trying," Gandalf answered, still tense but keeping his stance. And in the next instant, the giants moved. Whatever curiosity had held them now turned to play, or fury. They seized handfuls of earth and hurled them down. Massive boulders, each the size of a hill, were flung toward the pass. The air seemed to tear. The ground shuddered as rocks, like islands of stone, fell upon the valley below. Dewey and Gandalf braced behind their barrier as the giant stones tumbled toward Thorin and the others. The protective wards took the brunt, but the situation had become desperate. The giants' game had escalated into a deluge of falling mountains, and the company still crouched among the rocks beneath. Chapter 71, Goblin Town. Confringo! A blinding spell struck the boulder and shattered it into 1,000 fragments. Dewey stood at the front, watching the distant stone giants with narrowed eyes. "Gandalf, your plan isn't working," he called. The spell had only drawn more attention from the rock giants. Gandalf shrugged, looking innocent. "Things don't always go as planned, do they? At least Bill and the others are safe, aren't they?" Dewey rolled his eyes. There was no time for idle banter now. "Watch out!" Gandalf shouted. Several rock giants hefted boulders and hurled them toward Dewey and Gandalf. The stones fell like meteors, each one carrying the force to smash through rock and pulverize anyone beneath it. Dewey reacted instantly. He gripped his wand, gathering every scrap of power he had. "Protego Maxima!" A solid barrier blossomed around them, a thick spherical shield that took the full impact. Gandalf slammed his staff into the air. A shock of force exploded from it and shattered the incoming boulders into flying fragments, which the shield then stopped. They had weathered that volley, but the giants only picked up more stones and launched them again. The two of them exchanged a grave look. Spellcasting took energy. They could not sustain this forever. The giants, by comparison, had an inexhaustible supply of rocks. Gandalf's jaw tightened. We can't meet them head-on. We need to blind them, find Thorin's company, and get out. I might have something, Dewey said, voice tense but urgent. He had not tested it in battle before. I've never used it in the field, though. Then do it, Gandalf urged, smashing another boulder to pieces. I trust you. Dewey summoned the Book of Spells. He remembered a smoke spell that could cloak figures and obscure vision. He'd once seen Dumbledore use something like it to cloud London when he'd met Newt Scamander. He skimmed the pages, learning as he went. Vaporous cloud. The spell was simpler than he'd feared. Thick mist poured from the tip of his wand, swirling outward in a living vortex. In moments, the entire high pass was swallowed by a dense fog, visibility reduced to a hand's length. The giants roared in frustration and clawed at the air, unable to part the never-ending mist. They began to hurl boulders blindly. Good work, Dewey, Gandalf murmured. Guided by the Palantir, the two made their way through the cloud, slipping between the staggering giants. The crystal ball's faint glow showed them the direction. With the shroud hiding them, they reached a cave tucked into the pass. The cave seemed empty at first. No signs of recent departure. Gandalf struck the stone with his staff. The wall gave way and a dark, wide chute yawned below. This is a trap, he said. Goblin work. Thorin and the company, taken. Dewey took the Palantir in both hands and peered. The crystal resolved into a grim scene. Thorin and his companions stood in a vast underground cavern, a maze of wooden suspension bridges and ladders, tens of thousands of goblins packed across the chasm. Goblins, small, dark green, fond of the dark, lived in caverns and mines. Cunning and cruel, they preferred ambush and traps to open combat. The dwarves were disarmed and bound, brought before a huge figure on a raised platform, the Goblin King. Unlike the smaller goblins around him, the king was massive, his head enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, and he leaned on a staff crowned with a ram's head. He was clever, cruel, and clearly delighted at his captives. On the Palantir, Dewey caught sight of Bill slipping through the shadows with the hobbit talent for staying unseen. For a moment, Dewey allowed himself relief. Bill had eluded capture. Then his stomach dropped. A goblin spotted Bill. In the scramble that followed, both Bill and the goblin tumbled into a yawning chasm beneath the cavern. They fell a great distance. Somehow Bill survived with only bruises and scrapes. The goblin hit the rocks and died. Dewey let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Bill was alive, lucky, stubbornly fortunate in all the ways that make a protagonist survive where others would not. Dewey slid the Palantir back into its leather pouch. He did not intend to tamper with whatever destiny was unfurling around Bill in the One Ring. Hobbits like Bill were unusually resistant to certain magics. Even so, the ring's corruption was legendary. Dewey had no wish to test whether he could resist it. Better to keep his distance and let fate run its course. Gandalf and Dewey entered the cave system. Below the pass, the world turned into a vast underground labyrinth, tunnels branching into chambers, flickering torchlight casting monstrous shadows. The dwarves were already before the Goblin King, forced to stand in chains as the king fumed over the spoils taken from them. When the goblins examined the dwarves' confiscated gear, they found elvish-crafted items, and worse, Thorin's sword, Orcrist, the blade that had slain many goblins. The king's face contorted with fury. They were sent by the Elves, he snarled, then pointed at the captives with his ram-headed staff. Kill them all! The command echoed through the cavern as the goblins surged, their shrill cries filling the air. Chapter 72. The Might of the Mandrake. From a distance, two figures cloaked by a disillusionment charm watched the chaos unfold. Dewey leaned toward Gandalf and murmured, "Gandalf, should we intervene?" Gandalf shook his head slightly. "Wait a moment." The Goblin King recognized Thorin below, and after sneering at the dwarf's ruined state, barked orders for a messenger to be sent to Azog the Orc to claim the reward. At that instant, Gandalf sprang forward. unleashing a forceful magical shockwave that collapsed part of the tunnel. Scores of goblins, including the Goblin King, were hurled aside by the impact. Gandalf landed before the dwarves like a guardian. "Grab your weapons and run," he called. The goblins in the cave numbered in the tens of thousands. Though Gandalf had felled a portion, they poured in from all directions. The company fought their way forward while repelling the endless swarm behind them. Suddenly, the fallen Goblin King reappeared, his gargantuan form blocking their only route. "Do you think you can escape?" "Never," he bellowed, swinging a huge club with savage intent. Goblins surged in from every side, and the group's hope dwindled. "Gandalf, what do we do?" Balin cried, clinging to the wizard for guidance. Gandalf's face was untroubled. He even smiled. "Don't worry, we have help." Petrificus Totalis! A flash of magic struck the Goblin King from behind. His features froze, his body locked in place. Only his eyes betrayed a last, blank terror. Dewey slipped in behind him, drew his flame sword, and drove it into the king's lower back. Scorching fire seared through the giant's innards. With the king dead, the surrounding goblins faltered, then erupted into enraged, frantic cries. "He killed the king! The wizard killed the king! Avenge the king!" They lunged like a tide, maddened and murderous. "Protego totalum!" Dewey raised a broad, protective barrier that enclosed the company, keeping the goblins outside. The horde pressed against the shield in a writhing, wrenching mass, a living wall that could not be pierced. The defenders allowed themselves a moment's relief, but the sheer number of enemies still closing in worried the dwarves. "Dewey, what now? They can't get in, but we can't get out either," Thorin said, voice tight. "Don't worry, I have a plan." Dewey reached into his leather pouch and produced a pot containing a mandrake. Ever since the root had matured, he had bound it with Petrificus Totalis to keep its deadly cry silent. Now that he had learned the silencing charm from the Book of Spells, he could use it safely. First, he layered silencing charms over himself and the others. Then, with a wave of his wand, he lifted the Petrificus Totalis from the mandrake. He gripped the root and wrenched it free. The mandrake, heavy with the pain and rage of its confinement, convulsed and let out a piercing, keening shriek. Even under the silencing charm, the sound was jarring, and several of the protected company covered their ears. The goblins outside, however, bore the full force. Those nearest withered and died almost instantly. Others collapsed and tumbled into the chasm, their bodies pulverized on the rock below. Within moments, the cave fell utterly silent. Not a goblin remained standing. Dewey swept the fallen bodies over the edge with a flick of his wand. Then, as the mandrake continued to cry, he pinned it again with Petrificus Totalis and restored its quiet. He removed the silencing charms from everyone and nodded. All clear now. The dwarves stared at the scattered corpses, then at the small humanoid root in Dewey's hands. Awe and fear filled their faces. "My goodness, what is that?" Balin breathed. "Its cry wiped out so many of them." "It sounded like a woman's wail," Feely said, still pale. "Even behind the magic, I felt my soul lift as if it were being pulled out. I can't imagine what it would do to anyone truly exposed." "If you had heard it unshielded, you'd be like those goblins," Balin snapped, rolling his eyes. Keely's eyes went bright. "If its cry can do that, why don't we take it to the Lonely Mountain and hurl it at the dragon? Kill Smaug outright." All the dwarves stared at the mandrake, hope flaring across their faces. Thorin's own expression shifted to eager expectation. If the mandrake could fell the dragon, he would not need the Arkenstone to rally his people. The Lonely Mountain could be reclaimed at once. Gandalf, however, was sober. He, too, had been astonished by the mandrake's power, but he shook his head. "This mandrake has a voice of magic that attacks the soul. It is lethal to most creatures, but Smaug's spirit is ancient and strong. The mandrake might gravely wound him, perhaps incapacitate him if he is caught unawares, but it will not kill him outright." His words drained the dwarves of their sudden hope. Thorin's gaze fell from the plant. The idea of an easy victory faded. "Let's move. Get out of here," Thorin ordered. "Not yet," Dewey said. "Bilbo isn't accounted for." They all froze. "Bilbo? Where is he?" came a flurry of alarmed voices. Gandalf frowned. No one had seen the hobbit since the goblins had closed in. Balin's face tightened. "When that thing screamed Bilbo, he might not have heard it, did he?" He trailed off, eyes wide. Gandalf and the others looked at Dewey. He shook his head. "Don't worry. I made sure Bilbo was not in the clearing before I let the mandrake cry. Not here? Then where is he? Someone demanded. Dewey pointed down toward the chasm. I saw him fall down, onto the palantir. Relief washed over them. He's all right? Balin asked. He's lucky, Dewey said. He's fine except for a few scrapes. They sighed in unison. Wizard Dewey, next time say everything at once. That was terrifying. I'll try, Dewey muttered without much promise. Quickly, let me use the palantir to find him. Dewey produced the crystal ball and fixed his gaze into it. The others crowded close, watching the scene at the bottom of the abyss spill into the glass. Dewey frowned. Strange, he said, confused. I can't see Bilbo. The crystal showed the chasm floor clearly, but the hobbit was not there. 73. How to cultivate a basilisk. What's going on? Is this crystal ball broken? The dwarves crowded around, eyes wide. Gandalf frowned and reached out. Dewey, may I see it? Dewey handed over the palantir. Gandalf peered into it, searching for any sign of Bilbo. The image on the stone was the same as before. Bilbo's position was indicated, but his figure remained invisible. Is this palantir faulty? Has its service life ended? The elves make pretty things that don't last, not like what we dwarves forge, one of the dwarves grumbled. They complained among themselves, but Dewey's face went still as he realized what must be true. Bilbo had likely found the One Ring and slipped it on. That would explain why the palantir could detect his location but not show his form. Only Dewey knew for certain, and it would be foolish to blurt out that Bilbo possessed the One Ring in front of the dwarves. He kept a puzzled expression, slipped the ostensibly broken palantir back into his leather pouch, and suggested they search the depths of the cavern for Bilbo. Before they moved deeper, Dewey had one more task. He needed to sign in. Earlier, when they first entered the goblin caves, the system had tried to register, but there had been no time to respond. Now, with the immediate danger past, the system chimed again. Hogwarts sign-in system. Location: Misty Mountains, Goblin Town. Do you wish to sign in? Dewey answered inwardly. Sign in. Sign in successful. Congratulations, you have obtained the method for cultivating a basilisk. A method for cultivating a basilisk? Dewey stared, surprised. He knew enough of the wizarding world to understand how dangerous a basilisk could be. The creature's eyes carried lethal power. Direct eye contact meant instant death. Indirect contact caused petrification. Its venom was deadly, and aside from phoenix tears, almost impossible to cure. Basilisks lived for centuries and grew ever larger. They were virtually untamable, except by parselmouths, those who could speak Parseltongue. Many dark wizards who attempted to breed basilisks had perished by their own creations. Dewey had Parseltongue. If he could raise a basilisk, it would be like putting wings on a tiger. Yet the thought unsettled him. Parseltongue and a pet basilisk were the hallmarks of a dark wizard. He shrugged the concern aside. As someone once said, it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white. If it catches mice, it's a good cat. Strength mattered more than labels. He accepted the knowledge. The method was bizarre, but simple in outline. Find a 7-year-old rooster, wait for a night when Sirius shone in the sky, and force the rooster to lay a magical egg through a dark arts ritual tied to the stars. That egg would then be incubated beneath a toad and eventually hatched into an emerald green basilisk. A scarlet feather on the hatchling's head would mark a male, without it, a female. The ritual relied on astrological resonance, using Sirius as a catalyst to override natural instincts and compel the rooster to lay the cursed egg. Middle-earth had a Sirius, so the ritual was possible here. The problem was practical. 7-year-old roosters were rare, and Sirius's appearance was seasonal, around midnight on January 1st each year. It was already June. Dewey would have to wait half a year. By then, their quest for the Lonely Mountain would likely be over, so he set the idea aside for now. The goblins in the caverns were either dead or unconscious, posing no immediate threat. Rather than rush for Bilbo, the dwarves' eyes turned to plunder. The largest chamber, clearly the Goblin King's hall, promised the most treasure. When they entered, their breath caught. The chamber was piled with gold, silver, gems, and diamonds in quantities Dewey had never seen. Perhaps only the hoard under the Lonely Mountain could rival it. Even Thorin, who had seen that treasure, was astonished. "My goodness, we're rich!" Dwalin's voice was full of avarice. "Don't drool, Dwalin. This is Dewey's spoil of war. None of it belongs to you." Balin scolded, thumping his bald head. The reminder sobered them. They were greedy, but they had not risked this escape. Dewey had. Generous as ever, Dewey told them to take what they could carry. Thorin refused, as usual, but the others filled their pockets and packs until they bulged. As Dewey watched the dwarves shovel treasure, a flash of silver caught his eye beneath a pile of coins. He moved the gold aside and revealed an exquisite spear. Entirely silver-white and glowing faintly with a cold light, its shaft was inlaid with delicate patterns and inscrutable runes. The spearhead gleamed like a snow-capped peak, pure white, impossibly sharp, as if it could pierce any substance. Dewey reached out and gripped the spear. At his touch, his pupils narrowed and the magic inside him surged into the weapon. The spear flared with brilliant cold light. Its head seemed to crackle with explosive force. Instinctively, Dewey thrust it into the stone wall, and the spear drove through the rock as if it were soft clay. A tremendous destructive power burst from the spearhead, cracks racing through the wall as if it would collapse. Gandalf, standing nearby, had watched the blade awaken. His face changed. "Dewey, may I see it?" Dewey noticed Gandalf's expression and handed the spear over. "Gandalf," he asked, "do you recognize this spear?" Chapter 74, The Divine Spear. Aeglos Gandalf took the spear, rubbing his thumb along the silvery shaft and studying it closely. He whistled. "Dewey, your luck is uncanny." Dewey watched him with a small smile. Gandalf's eyes gleamed. "If I'm not mistaken, this has a remarkable pedigree. This is Aeglos, the divine spear of Gil-galad, High King of the Noldor. It fought with him in many battles and even drew Sauron's blood in the War of the Last Alliance. After Gil-galad fell, the spear vanished. Nobody had expected to find such a thing among the Goblin King's horde. At Gandalf's words, everyone turned to look at the silver-white weapon. Even the dwarves, usually scornful of elven lore, knew the name of Gil-galad, last High King of the Noldor, founder of Lindon, who joined with Elendil to form the last alliance of elves and men. They had marched out of Rivendell, crossed the Misty Mountains, routed Sauron's host on the Dagorlad, and then besieged Barad-dûr. In the end, both Gil-galad and Elendil fell. Elendil's sword Narsil was broken, and Gil-galad's spear disappeared from history. Isildur later took the shards of Narsil and, cutting the One Ring from Sauron's hand, struck down Sauron's physical form. That was the tale the old songs told, and now Aeglos stood again in the light. Dewey turned the spear in his hands. It was nearly 2 meters long, forged of a metal he could not name, impossibly hard and piercing, yet so light he could wield it one-handed. Gandalf regarded it with envy. "Use it well. It has felt Sauron's blood and yet remains whole. Indestructible is no idle boast. It can pierce dark armor. It may even pierce dragon scales. At the Lonely Mountain, it could be the difference between victory and doom." "I will," Dewey said, solemn. He already carried the flame sword, but who would complain about another weapon, especially one declared indestructible? He had been worrying, too, about the limits of spellcraft against powerful Maya-level beings. Magic tore apart orcs and lesser foes, but Balrogs and dragons were on another order. He even had doubts about whether an Avada Kedavra cast at his strength could fell Smaug. The killing curse strikes at the soul, and dragons' souls are ancient and hardy. As in the stories of Harry Potter, Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Moody, once sneered that a poorly cast Avada Kedavra at someone of robust spirit would merely give him a nosebleed, so Dewey feared his current magic might not be enough. A native artifact like Aeglos could deal a kind of force his spells could not. He slipped the spear into the leather pouch space he carried. Then, looking at the glittering piles of gold and jewels crowded in the cave, he shrugged. He did not need more treasure, but he would not leave it behind if he could take it. He scooped up several pouches from the ground and used an undetectable extension charm to expand each to nearly 2 meters of interior space. With a lazy flick of his wand, he divided the hoard into the pouches, filling more than a dozen. He then tucked those pouches into another pouch space. The dwarves gaped. All that treasure, crammed into a handful of little pouches? Their earlier, sweaty haulings suddenly seemed laughable. Under their resentful, pleading looks, Dewey smirked and tapped his nose. He expanded everyone's money pouches as well. Even Thorin, who had taken nothing, received a spatial pouch from him. Joy and chaos followed. The dwarves shoved their valuables into the enlarged pouches, until the coins rattled and jewels vanished into velvet. Keely and Feely, the younger ones, plunged both hands in and, to their own delight, pulled out a sleeve and pretended it was a severed arm, shrieking with glee at the absurd sight. "Enough playing, we should leave," Dewey called, finally. "Don't forget, Bilbo is still missing." The dwarves sobered at once. "Right, Bilbo," they chorused. They spilled out of the treasure chamber and into the stony mouth of the cave, but the sight that met them stopped them cold. A sheer, bottomless chasm where a path should have been. No ledge, no slope, only a dizzying drop. "It's too steep," someone said. "How do we get down?" "Jump," Dewey said simply. "I'll catch you with magic." Before anyone could argue, he stepped to the edge and leaped. A gasp ran through the company. Beaufort went pale. He didn't fall to his death, did he?" he spluttered. Gandalf chuckled, and with a wink at the dwarves followed. "Listen to Dewey. I'll go first," he said, and was gone before any further objection could be formed. The dwarves looked at one another, then at the yawning void. "You jump first, Feely," Killy jibed. "No, you do it," Feely snapped. Beaufort edged back from the lip, then planted his feet and shook his head so hard his beard fluttered. "It's too high. We'd be meat paste. I'm not jumping. I like living." After a heartbeat's hesitation, Thorin squared his shoulders and leapt without a word. The rest of the company's resolve snapped into action. If Thorin fell, the quest would be lost, and none of them would risk that. One by one, they hurled themselves into the air, screaming as the wind roared past. They expected the ground to rush up and split them. Instead, a voice sounded from below, calm, practiced. "Cushioning charm," Dewey called. Their fall slowed until they hung helplessly 20 centimeters above the stone, as if suspended on hands of soft air. Then the charm let go, and they all tumbled forward, face first into the earth. Groans, curses, and sputtered laughter filled the cave as the dwarves rolled to their feet, bedraggled and furious. Balin clutched his chest and took great, shuddering breaths. "My heart needs repairing," he said, still pale. Gandalf was standing beside Dewey, smiling at the sight of dwarves who had learned to dislike thrills. "It's a rare thing to jump from such a height and live to tell the tale," he said. "Not for me," Beaufort muttered. "Give me solid ground and a hot stew." "Where's Bilbo?" Beaufort asked suddenly, looking around. "Wasn't he down in that pit? I don't see him anywhere." Dewey produced the palantir and held it carefully. After all this time, he thought, Bilbo would surely have taken off the ring and revealed himself. He peered into the Seeing Stone, searching for their missing hobbit. Chapter 75. One Ring. "Didn't your palantir already break? Can it still see anything?" Balin asked skeptically. "We'd be better off splitting up and searching." Dewey ignored the dwarves and concentrated on the palantir, searching for Bilbo's location. This time, Bilbo's figure finally resolved in the glass. "Bilbo. There he is. He's looking for an exit." The dwarves crowded around, craning to see Bilbo in the stone's vision. "Looks like your palantir is working again," one of them said. Dewey glanced at the image and walked to the left. "Follow me. We'll meet Bilbo, then get out of here." Gandalf fell into step beside him, the rest of the company close behind. Guided by the palantir, they threaded through the tunnels and at last spotted Bilbo in the distance, searching for a way out. "Bilbo," Beaufort called. Bilbo heard his name, turned with a surprised look, and waved joyfully. "I'm here." They joined up, and the dwarves embraced Bilbo with relief. "You're lucky, lad, falling from that height and coming out unhurt. If Dewey hadn't said you were all right, we'd have been worried sick," Balin said. "How did you know I was here?" Bilbo asked, still smiling. "Have you forgotten? Dewey has a palantir. It can find people, so of course he saw you." One of the dwarves added, "But that thing's temperamental. For a while it couldn't find a trace of you. Wonder what went wrong." Bilbo's expression tightened. He slid a hand into his pocket and touched something there, then looked at Dewey and met a pair of knowing eyes. He quickly looked away, nervous. Gandalf noticed as well and exchanged a look with Dewey. Unlike the dwarves, both of them understood that the palantir couldn't be broken in the ordinary way. If it had failed to show Bilbo, the cause lay with whatever had hidden him, not with the Seeing Stone itself. Neither man pressed the matter. Dewey had known something of Bilbo's encounter already, and Gandalf had no wish to pry. Bilbo felt a rush of relief mixed with shame. I just ran into." Bilbo began, but before he could finish, Gandalf's voice cut sharply toward the shadows opposite. Who's there? Avada Kedavra! A bolt of green light shot from Dewey's hand and struck the darkness. The spell's flash revealed a hunched, pale creature with bulging eyes. The blast hit the rock behind it and shattered stone, sending the creature tumbling. Is that Gollum? Dewey thought. The former owner of the One Ring? Before Dewey could move again, the creature stared at him with a mix of fear and hatred, then glanced spitefully at Bilbo. It turned and fled into the deeper rock. It doesn't look like a goblin, one of the dwarves said, bewildered. Bilbo, have you ever seen one of those? Yes. Bilbo nodded uncertainly. He called himself Gollum. He eats goblins sometimes, or the bodies of fallen goblins. He's a bit unhinged and kept talking to himself. I played riddles with him to buy time and then managed to slip away. Humph. A talking monster. Pity the spell didn't finish him, the dwarves grumbled. Never mind that, Gandalf said. We need to find an exit and get clear of these caverns. He looked to Dewey. Lead the way. Dewey glanced at the palantir, put it in his leather pouch, and nodded. Let's go. Get out of here first. Following the stone's guidance, they found an exit and emerged on the other side of the misty mountains. We're finally out, the dwarves cheered. Dewey took a money bag from his pack and handed it to Bilbo. I enchanted this. It's like a little magic sack, 2 cubic meters of space. It already holds some of the treasure we took from the goblin caves. There's still some room. Put your extra things in it. It'll make travel easier. Bilbo opened the sack and peered inside at the glittering coins and gems. He was surprised and moved. Thank you, Dewey. After hesitating and glancing at the others, he leaned close and whispered, Dewey, I actually picked up something at the bottom of the cave. Dewey held up a hand to stop him, a faint, understanding smile in his eyes. You don't have to tell anyone but me, Bilbo. If you want to keep it, that's your choice. At that, Bilbo's last reserve of hesitation dropped away. All right, I found a ring there. It seems magical. When I put it on, I became like I wasn't there at all. No one could see me. Dewey nodded. He already knew. Still, seeing Bilbo's excitement, he warned gently, don't wear it unless you absolutely must. It can bring dangers you can't foresee. Though hobbits have some natural resistance to the One Ring, it still affects them. Dewey explained so Bilbo could understand. Bilbo, be careful. You saw Gollum, but you don't know that he was once a hobbit. The ring changed him. He paused, watching Bilbo's face. The damage it does is not only to the body but to the mind and spirit. That is why, in the end, those who stay close to it need healing that the ordinary world cannot give. Bilbo was stunned. Gollum was a hobbit? That is the truth, Dewey said. Bilbo felt torn. Gollum's small, twisted form and the way he spoke had seemed oddly hobbit-like. The ring itself tugged at him, stirring selfishness and dark thoughts, ideas of hiding the thing, of pushing others away so he could keep it. He felt the ring in his pocket grow hot and yearned to throw it away, yet could not bear to part with it. It felt as though two wills argued inside him, one clear and rational, the other obsessive and secretive. What should I do? Bilbo asked helplessly. Don't be alarmed. I replied. I'm only telling you so you'll be on your guard. Don't overuse it. Keep your wits about you. In the short term, it won't do too much harm if you're careful. They pressed on, but soon distant howls cut through the air and everyone's faces changed. From the slope below, thousands of orcs poured forward, each mounted upon a giant wolf, wargs, their armor glinting as they advanced. Wargs, someone cried. To arms, Gandalf shouted. Chapter 76. A Sneak Attack. When the dense ranks of orcs filled the mountain slope, everyone felt the weight of a genuine threat. Bofer the dwarf jabbed an elbow into Dewey's ribs. Dewey, pull out the mandrake and end them now. All eyes turned to him. The memory of the mandrake's effect in the goblin cave was still sharp. Dewey swept his gaze over his companions, then to the distant wargs, and shook his head. Don't expect too much from the mandrake here. The cave amplified its cry. Out in the open, and over this distance, its song won't have the same power. Still, he brought it out. He muffled the company with a soundproofing spell, nudged the humanoid plant free of its pot, and flung it toward the charging orcs and wargs. As he had predicted, the ones nearest to the mandrake froze, their faces slackening and their bodies crumpling, unconscious or worse, while those farther off, startled, halted their advance. The orc leader on the ridge, hearing the faint cries, clutched his head and fixed his glare on Dewey and the strange, weeping plant. Fall back to a place where you cannot hear it, he barked in the black speech. He is that black wizard. Do not listen. The chief ordered us to take the dwarves' heads, an officer answered. Then strike from afar, shoot them down. The chief only wants their heads. The dwarves on Dewey's side whooped and made rude gestures to taunt the distant enemy. But in the next breath, a storm of arrows descended. Dewey's staff shot up. A shimmering barrier flared into being and took the volleys. The dwarves cheered. Then Dewey felt a cold warning through his limbs, an instinct that something mortal was bearing down on him. On the hill, the tall orc leader grinned as he drew an arrow and loosed it straight at Dewey. The missile ignored the magical shield, passing through and driving into Dewey's chest. "Dewey!" came a chorus of disbelief as the group surged around him. Bilbo knelt immediately. Gandalf was faster still, catching Dewey before he could collapse. He paled at the sight of the black arrowhead embedded in Dewey's breast. "A Morgul arrow," he said. "A Morgul arrow?" Bilbo echoed. "It's an arrow forged in Mordor," Gandalf said. "Runic malice laid upon it. Its head carries a grievous poison. Those struck by one die an awful death." "Will he?" Thorin's voice was thin. Dewey coughed once, a small, rough sound. He pulled the arrow free and flung back his robes, revealing a glint of bright metal beneath, a silver chainmail shirt. "Mithril," Thorin breathed. "I did not think you had such a treasure. No wonder it held the arrow." Relief passed through the company. Dewey stared at the arrow in his hand. If he had not been wearing the chainmail he had found in Dale, he might not have survived the shot. Anger flared in him as he looked toward the orc leader on the ridge. Since his transmigration, he had been lucky far more than not. He would not let this man leave unpunished. "Keely," Dewey began, and Killy interrupted, alarmed. "The mandrake. It stopped crying." They looked out past the soundproofing and saw the plant collapsed and spent, its face slack and whimpering. The orcs watching from a distance noticed it too and shifted uneasily. Dewey summoned the plant back, reburied it, and covered it with earth to rest. "Gandalf," Dewey said quietly, "I'll need you to lead Thorin and the others in a break for it." "And you?" Gandalf asked. Dewey's face hardened as it turned toward the distant leader. "Me? I'm going after that leader." Though the mithril had saved him, the sting still throbbed in his chest. He would not be content until he had taken that arrower down. He whispered the name of a spell. A gauzy mist spilled out from him and spread, a gray veil that swallowed several miles of mountainside. "Misty Veil," he murmured, and the shroud hung low, muffling sound and sight. The wargs and orcs grew uneasy in the gloom. They could only judge one another's positions by scent and howl. Dewey slid through the mist like a shadow, guided by the Palantir, eyes fixed on the ridge where the leader stood. When he met scouts and wargs, he struck without mercy. "Shatter," he cried, and the word ripped through flesh and bone. With each blast, a warg or orc was torn into fragments, their screams knifing through the fog. Hearing the screams, the orc leader's face tightened. He barked an order in black speech. "Bring them all together. Guard against the wizard's sneak attack." The warg at his perch sniffed the air and growled. The other wargs and orcs answered, surging toward their master. Dewey watched this on the crystal ball and smiled with cold satisfaction. "So many of you gathered in one place," he thought. "You give me the chance to finish you all at once." The panic around the leader deepened, but he took some comfort in numbers. No matter how potent a wizard's craft, could it kill so many in an instant? He pointed where a warg had nosed toward the mist and shouted an aiming command. "Shoot there!" Arrows flew into the veil. The leader even knocked another Morgul arrow and fired it into the gray. For a moment they vanished into the fog. Then a voice answered from the mist, high and sudden. "Volley!" With that command, all the arrows turned. The shafts reversed in mid-air and returned, stabbing into the ranks from which they'd come. Screams rose as quivers emptied in their own defenders. More than a few orcs and wargs were skewered or trampled in the confusion. The leader dove behind a subordinate and used the man as a shield. The burst of arrows missed him this time. Then Dewey's eyes flashed a startling red. He let the power gather and let out the name of the final spell. Thunderous explosion! The sky answered in a terrible, brilliant flash. A blast rolled outward, a crushing wave that shredded the mist and hurled orcs and beasts like rag dolls. Those nearest were blown to pieces. Those further out were smashed into the ground or thrown into the rocks. The veil detonated and was gone, leaving a scene of splintered bodies and smoldering carnage where the leader's gathered force had stood. Chapter 77. Azog rubble lay everywhere where the explosion had torn the ground open. Black blood splattered the stones, fragments of wargs and orcs littered the clearing. Duer walked through the wreckage, staff in hand, cutting down the few orcs and wargs that still lingered with little effort. When he reached the leader of the orcs, he saw the creature had lost an arm and a leg, but was still alive. Duer raised an eyebrow in surprise. "You're a stubborn one," he said. "Not dead yet?" The orc leader's eyes were wild with fear. His voice rasped as he spat. "Wizard, you don't know who you face. Our master's power is boundless. He is Lord of Darkness. The whole world will grovel before him, and you cannot stop him." "Your master? Do you mean Sauron, hiding in Dol Guldur?" Duer replied with a cold, mocking laugh. Before he could say more, a Morgul arrow, one that had almost struck him, sank into the orc leader's skull, killing him instantly. Duer breathed out at last. He paid no mind to the remaining orcs and wargs. They fled into the trees. Duer drew his palantir and peered into its polished surface. "Where are Gandalf and the others?" he muttered. His eyes narrowed as he leaned closer. "Another band of orcs? They've driven them to the cliff?" In the crystal, he saw Gandalf and the others being cornered, pressed toward the edge of a precipice by snarling wargs and arrows. Leading the assault was a white warg, ridden by an orc whose hand was a twisted iron claw. The orc's eyes were fixed on Thorin with burning hatred. Duer's breath caught. "Azog the Defiler," he whispered. "It must be Azog." In the palantir, Gandalf suddenly looked up and shouted in Duer's direction. Duer could not hear his voice through the stone, but the urgency was unmistakable. He shook his head in frustration. Gandalf had told him before, wizards were limited. They were servants of the Valar, sent to guide the peoples of Middle-earth, not to overwhelm them with power. They were not allowed to use overly mighty magics. They had to preserve free will. Duer grumbled inwardly at the Valar's rules. So much restriction, like commanders who demand results while tying their subordinates' hands. No wonder Gandalf preferred striking with his staff rather than unleashing devastating spells. Shaking off the distraction, Duer moved as fast as he could toward the misty mountains. By the time he reached the trees, Gandalf and the others were already forced up the trunks, clinging to branches. If Duer did not hurry, they might be rescued by great eagles, or worse. On the ridge of the misty mountains, Thorin and Azog faced one another. The old hatred between them flared. Thorin stared in disbelief that Azog yet lived. Azog's face was a mask of bitter vengeance. He had never forgiven Thorin for the day the dwarf used an oak branch as a shield and severed his arm. He had hung a price on Thorin's head ever since, and now he rode out personally with warg riders to finish him. "I smell fear," Azog taunted, fixing Thorin with a cruel leer. "Your father smelled of it too, Thorin, son of Thrain." "Leave the others," he ordered. "Take him, you, kill him, and let the rest die." The wargs leapt, teeth sinking into trunks and branches. The orcs watched with cruel amusement rather than using arrows, letting the wargs force the trees to break and the dwarves to panic. The dwarves hacked and beat at the wolves, shouting and trying to keep their footing. "Think of something," someone cried. "I don't want to end up in the belly of one of those beasts." "Where is Duer? When will he come?" another asked. "If Duer were here, he'd toss over that blasted willow grass of his and we'd be saved," said a hopeful voice. "Don't count on it," someone else replied. "Duer is up against thousands of orcs and wargs. He won't clear them all in an instant." Bilbo clung to the rough bark and looked to Gandalf. "Do you know when Duer will be here?" Gandalf shook his head. "I cannot say. He faces many enemies, and we cannot always rely on him alone. That is not good for any of us." He glanced up and brightened. "But if we have time, we might call on some old friends." He plucked a moth from the bark, whispered into its wings, and let it fly. The orcs, after some patience, ordered the wargs to tear the trees down. Under the weight and the wolves biting, trunk after trunk crashed to the ground. The company was forced from tree to tree until only one pine remained. That tree swayed under the weight and the effort of those clinging to it. It threatened to topple. Gandalf struck a pine cone with his staff. A flare leapt to it, and he flung it down. Flames leapt along the felled trees. Fire, clearly of Gandalf's making, drove the wargs back and bought them a moment. But before they could breathe, the last tree's roots tore free and the trunk slid, sending everyone toward the ravine. They found themselves clinging to the edge, dangling over the abyss. Thorin dropped down to the cliff face to face Azog again. He fought to buy time, to protect his friends, but this duel was not like the one that had won him his title. Azog was stronger now. Thorin was beaten and grievously wounded. As Azog raised his blade for the killing stroke, Bilbo swung Sting wildly and stopped the blade. Azog's fury blazed. With a vicious swipe, he knocked the small sword from Bilbo's grip. "Kill him!" Azog bellowed, urging his warg forward. Then, in an instant, a dazzling spell struck the warg that had lunged at Bilbo. The beast was ripped apart as if cleaved by 1,000 blades. Bilbo stared, then his face broke into a stunned grin. "Doer!" he cried. Azog's mount exploded into pieces at that spell. The suddenness of it shocked him. He snatched a nearby orc and thrust him forward as a shield. Doer's magic hit the shielded orc. The creature's body was torn open and fell in pieces. Black blood spattered across Azog's armor and face. Chapter 78, The Death of Azog. "Black-robed wizard," shouted a voice in black speech. Azog turned, uneasy, as Dewey suddenly materialized before him. He saw the wizard standing safely where he was, yet there was no sign of the rest of his orc band. His heart sank. "Are you looking for this?" Dewey asked, and flung an orc leader's severed head at Azog's feet. "I've already sent that orc team to hell. You won't be waiting on them. Or I can send you to meet them. Avada Kedavra." Words could be deadly. Dewey did not think of himself as a villain, but he fought with the same ruthless efficiency, strike fast and strike clean. If he could cut down Azog here, the orcs would be leaderless for the moment. Maybe the pursuit and even the battle of 5 armies might be averted. Dewey's magic came quick, but Azog was no slow brute. In the orc world, strength earned respect. Azog had clawed his way to the top by killing challengers. Relying on enormous strength and quick reflexes, he dodged the worst of Dewey's spell and shoved an orc subordinate in front of him as a living shield for the rest. Seeing himself threatened, Azog drew his intact arm back and loosed a Morgul arrow from his wrist, an arrow etched with dark runes. Dewey was alert. He sent up a levitation charm, directing a pine log to take the shot. That same moment, Azog seized an orc from a nearby warg, vaulted onto its back, and fled. The other orcs and wargs scattered into disarray. "Don't let Azog escape," the dwarves cried. "Don't worry, he can't escape," Dewey said calmly, watching Azog flee as if he had already planned for it. Not far ahead, the ground gave way. Azog and his warg plunged into a patch of mud, a hidden swamp that had opened at the edge of the trap. Those behind him followed, thrashing and sinking. Azog did not give up. He climbed atop a warg to haul himself out, then brutalized the remaining wargs into makeshift stepping stones, bounding to the far side. "Wizard, I will remember you. You will be my lifelong enemy. Azog!" he roared, his hatred shifting from Thorin to the newcomer. Azog answered with a blast of his own. Exploding bolt! The force ripped open the hilltop and set off a landslide. The mountains collapsing! The dwarves screamed as the cliff beneath them cracked and began to crumble. "Don't panic. Our friends the eagles are here," Gandalf called, and no sooner had he spoken than a high, piercing cry echoed overhead. More than a dozen great eagles swept in, enormous and fierce. They snatched up the fleeing company and carried them away. One of the eagles dropped down, scooped Dewey up, and then tossed him onto the back of another eagle. Dewey gasped at the speed and force of the rescue. As the eagles lifted them into the sky, the hill beneath them gave way entirely, tumbling into the chasm. Rocks and earth collapsed, burying orcs and wargs in a thunderous fall. Dewey, in midair, checked the Palantir out of habit. He wanted to be certain Azog was finished. The Palantir told a different story. Azog was not crushed. With iron claw hooked into the cliff's face, the claw still attached to his severed arm, Azog had held himself from the worst of the fall. Could it be a villain's destiny to cling on until the last curtain? Dewey didn't like the idea. He patted the great eagle beneath him. "Brother Eagle," he asked, "mind if I get down first? I'll go finish Azog, then we leave." With a sharp cry, the eagle plummeted without giving Dewey time to second guess. The sudden drop made his stomach lurch. On the ruined slope, Azog had survived long enough to see his buried comrades and to roar in rage. Wizard, I will make you pay for this blood. Are you calling me Azog? A jaunty voice answered from above. Azog looked up and saw Dewey hurtling toward him on the eagle's back. Knowing the odds, he tried to flee, but Dewey did not give him a second chance. Avada Kedavra, Dewey intoned. The killing curse struck true. Azog tore a scream as cracks spidered across his hide like broken porcelain and black blood welled from the fissures. He still clung to life by a thin thread. You're hard to kill, Azog, Dewey muttered, cold eyes on the orc. But today is your death day. Defindo! Azog's features changed, his bloodshot eyes dulled. The cutting spell lanced through him. With a final rattle, he died. Dewey exhaled, watching the great orc slump. When Gandalf and the rest flew over, the dwarves saw Azog's corpse and erupted into cheers. Gandalf's face lit with approval. Dewey, you have slain Azog, king of the orcs. News of this will run like wildfire through orc-kind across Middle-earth. The title Enemy of the Orcs is well-deserved. Gandalf's smile grew serious. But take heed, with Azog gone, they will put a price on you. The orcs will seek you out. Be prepared for their wrath. I understand, Dewey said. He felt no dread, only an odd satisfaction. With Azog dead, there was no reason to linger. The great eagles carried them swiftly over the misty mountains, and they only paused when they reached the Carrack on the Anduin. They did not fly straight to the lonely mountain. The eagles made their homes in the misty mountains and kept watch over the orcs there. They were reluctant to stray far. Besides, like Gandalf and the other Maiar, the eagles did not meddle too heavily in Middle-earth's affairs. They assisted against great evil, but they would not supplant the people's own efforts. Dewey could not help smirking. Wasn't this like the old tales where heroes must endure long journeys instead of flying straight to the goal? He thought of the Monkey King and his single somersault to the western heavens. As Gandalf and the Eagle King exchanged farewells, Dewey glanced at the eagle's feathered crown, and an idea came to him. He turned to Gandalf quickly. Gandalf, your staff has been missing its core for so long. Perhaps an eagle's feather could serve as a new core. Chapter 79, The Great Bear. The great eagles and Gandalf both answered to Manwë, so their natures might be compatible. The other option would be the Balrog in the mines of Moria, but the Balrog's power was terrible. Even Gandalf at full strength might only achieve mutual destruction. Dewey had no confidence in using parts of a Balrog's body to fashion a staff for Gandalf. He could only hope the great eagle's feathers would be suitable. Otherwise, Gandalf's staff would be delayed indefinitely. The great eagle understood speech. When Dewey explained their need, the Eagle King cocked his head, plucked a single tail feather, and offered it to Gandalf. Gandalf accepted the gift without hesitation, smiling as he stroked the eagle's head. "Thank you, my friend," he said. The Eagle King nuzzled Gandalf's hand, then spread his wings and led the great eagles back to the misty mountains. Gandalf watched them go for a moment, then placed the feather in Dewey's palm. "If you please, Dewey." Dewey took the feather. It gleamed with a metallic sheen, humming with power. He felt the magic within it and nodded. "How is it, Gandalf? Is this feather suitable?" If it wasn't, they'd have to consider other materials. Gandalf smiled. "It feels right. It does not resist my magic." "That's good," Dewey breathed, relieved. "Gandalf, Dewey, hurry," the dwarves shouted anxiously. "Come and see Thorin. What's wrong with him?" At the dwarves' cries, Gandalf and Dewey hurried over. Thorin lay very still, showing no sign of waking. Gandalf knelt, examined him carefully, and his face grew grave. He was about to cast a healing spell when Dewey stepped forward. "Let me," Dewey said. He knew Gandalf couldn't use magic recklessly and didn't want to force him into a difficult choice. Pulling a vial from his cloak, he handed it to the dwarf Balin. "I have Bai-Xian elixir here, perfect for treating external wounds." "I'd almost forgotten you had potions, Dewey. This is better than anything I can do right now," Gandalf admitted, and he let Dewey take over. Balin and the other dwarves treated the elixir like a treasure. They applied it eagerly and clumsily, slathering Thorin's wounds with handfuls of the precious potion, afraid it wouldn't be enough. Dewey watched, pained. They had no sense of conservation. Bai-Xian elixir wasn't easy to make, and they used more than half a bottle in one go. The elixir worked quickly. Thorin's wounds knit, his breathing eased, and his eyes opened. For a moment he was stunned. He had long nursed a deep hatred for Azog. Azog had killed his grandfather Thror, and his father Thrain II's fall was also tied to Azog. He had never expected this enemy to be finished like this. When Thorin learned that Dewey had killed Azog, he was shaken, then solemnly thanked Dewey. He also thanked Bilbo, for had Bilbo not intervened against Azog's fatal blow, Thorin might have died. Wakened, Thorin was less arrogant and stubborn than before. The company felt more harmonious. They descended from the Carrock and followed the Anduin south, planning to take the old forest road through Mirkwood to the Lonely Mountain. Soon they came upon a large wooden homestead. It was ringed by a thorny hedge like a wall, with a tall wooden gate set in it. The gate stood wide, revealing several wooden buildings inside. Barns, stables, cowsheds, even bell-shaped beehives with thatched roofs. A broad track ran from the gate to the main house. The dwarves looked at the place with curiosity and a touch of suspicion. "Gandalf, is the owner of this place friend or foe?" one asked. Gandalf's expression turned cautious as he surveyed the surroundings. "Neither. He will either help us or kill us," Bilbo translated dryly. Before anyone could argue further, a great crashing came from the nearby forest. Bushes were thrown aside like blades of grass. Something vast barreled through the trees. With a deafening roar, a black great bear burst into view, so large he seemed like a small mountain. Each thunderous footfall made the ground tremble. "My heavens!" everyone cried. Faces went pale with disbelief. "Run!" Gandalf shouted. He spun and sprinted toward the open gate and the buildings beyond. Seeing the monstrous bear coming, no one hesitated. They fled for the gate and the shelter inside. The bear roared and gave chase. They made it into the yard and slammed the inner door shut just as the great bear reached the gate. The dwarves pressed against the wood, hearts pounding, peering fearfully through the cracks. "Gandalf, this house can't withstand that thing. What do we do?" they demanded. Gandalf, however, breathed more easily once they were inside. "Don't worry. As long as we're inside that house, we'll be safe. He won't attack his own home." "He?" Bilbo noticed Gandalf's wording. "You know this bear, Gandalf?" Dewey looked at Gandalf and said, "He's probably the owner of this place. That's why Gandalf says the bear won't attack the house." Gandalf nodded. "Dewey's right. The great bear might be hostile toward us, but he will never destroy his own dwelling. So as long as we stay here, we'll be all right." Gandalf made himself comfortable and sat down, as if at his own hearth. "All right, it's getting late. Everyone get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." They exchanged doubtful glances. There was still a huge bear outside. Who could sleep easily? Still, Dewey followed Gandalf's lead. With a few sure gestures of transfiguration, he produced mattresses and bedding, then lay down as if without a care. Seeing Dewey so relaxed helped the others calm themselves, and one by one they took the conjured mattresses and tried to rest. They had been through a long, exhausting day. As Dewey lay on the soft mattress, a small notification flickered in his mind. "Hogwarts sign-in system. Location, Bjorn's house. Do you wish to sign in?" Dewey smiled and answered silently. "Sign in." "Sign in successful. Congratulations. Animagus Transfiguration unlocked." "Animagus Transfiguration?" Dewey's eyes brightened. This sign-in had come with a delightful surprise. Chapter 80, Animagus. Animagus is one of the highest achievements in human transfiguration. It allows a wizard to transform into a specific, non-magical animal, making it easy to hide one's identity or go undercover. The process is exacting. One must hold a mandrake leaf in the mouth for an entire lunar month, from one full moon to the next, without swallowing it or taking it out. If the leaf leaves the mouth, the whole process must be started again. On the second full moon, the leaf is removed. A small crystal vial is filled with saliva, and the leaf is immersed in it to be bathed in pure moonlight. If that night is cloudy, a fresh mandrake leaf must be found, and the procedure restarted. To the moonlit vial, you add one of your own hairs and a silver teaspoonful of dew, collected from somewhere that has received neither sunlight nor human contact for 7 full days. Finally, a death's head hawkmoth pupa is added, and the mixture is set aside in a dark, quiet place until the next thunderstorm with lightning arrives. It must not be looked at or disturbed in the meantime. The whole undertaking requires a great deal of luck. The waiting can take weeks, months, or even years. For that reason, few in the magical world ever become animagi. Still, Dewey had faith in his luck. Having obtained the Animagus transformation spell, he was very curious about what animal he would become. He looked up at the full moon through the skylight and felt fortune was on his side. He took a mandrake from his spatial pouch, plucked its most tender new leaf, and tucked it under his tongue. Though it felt strange at first, it didn't much affect his speech or eating. He lay back down. After the long climb up the mountain and several battles, exhaustion overcame him, and he fell asleep immediately. Outside, Dewey knew the giant bear was Bjorn, the skin changer, a righteous, if formidable, character. Unlike the nervous dwarves, Dewey and Gandalf were relaxed. They had compelled lodging for the night and were content to sleep deeply. The next morning, everyone woke and peered through the crack in the door. The bear was gone. A very tall man stood instead, vigorously chopping firewood. Seeing this, Gandalf told the dwarves to stay inside for now and to come out 2 by 2 only when he gave the signal. Bjorn, he knew, had never been fond of dwarves. Gandalf, Dewey, and Bilbo walked out together. "Gandalf, you seem a bit nervous?" Bilbo asked, puzzled. "Nonsense. Why would I be nervous?" Gandalf replied, though his expression was a little strained. Dewey watched him with amusement. After they had forced themselves into the house and kept its owner outside the night before, they now felt somewhat embarrassed facing him. They approached the 3-meter-tall man. He was immense, black hair, a thick black beard, broad shoulders, and shirtless. As he swung the giant axe, his muscles bulged, and he split a thick log in a single blow. He barely seemed to notice their arrival and continued chopping. "Ahem, good morning," Gandalf said first. The man didn't turn. Gandalf raised his voice. "Good morning." The man stopped, swung the axe, turned, and looked at them with a cold stare as if he could split them like kindling. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am Gandalf, Gandalf the Grey." "This is Dewyer, a wizard in black robes, and this is Bilbo Baggins," Gandalf added. "Never heard of them." The man's voice was flat and unwelcoming. Gandalf's throat tightened, and he tried to put the man at ease. "Perhaps you know Radagast? He lives on the western edge of Mirkwood." "What do you want?" the man demanded. "Only to thank you for your hospitality. We sheltered in your house last night." "2 wizards and a hobbit? What brings you here?" The man's eyes were sharp, suspicious. Gandalf explained, stumbling a little. "It's a long story. We were pursued by orcs in the mountains. We fought for some time, and thanks to Dewyer, he killed Azog, we were able to get here." "Who did you say you killed?" The man sprang forward, furious, moving as if to seize Gandalf. Gandalf stepped back and put Dewey forward. "You heard right, Mr. Bjorn. Azog is dead. He was killed yesterday by this black-robed wizard, Dewyer, right before your eyes." Born's gaze snapped to Dewey. His eyes were sharp and wild. "Is what he says true?" Dewey shrugged and met his gaze without flinching. "Not much point in lying about it. The truth shows itself." Born stared for a long moment, then let his imposing aura recede. A thin, not quite pleasant smile creased his face. "I believe you," he said. "Orcs are my enemies. You killed their leader, so you are my friend." At that instant, the dwarves, having misread Gandalf's earlier signal, came out 2 by 2. Bjorn's pleasant expression vanished. He grabbed his giant axe and glared at them. "You brought dwarves with you," Gandalf tried to explain, embarrassed. "I should confess, there are a few dwarves with us." "A few?" Bjorn demanded. He looked at the 13 dwarves and snorted. "I hate dwarves. They're greedy and short-sighted, but I hate orcs more. My people once lived in these mountains," he continued. "Then orcs came down from the north. Azog the Defiler killed almost all my kin. I am all that remains. You are hunted by orcs. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. You may stay." Bjorn invited them all back into the house and provided bread, milk, and honey. His attitude toward the dwarves remained chilly, but toward Dewey he was warm and hospitable, insisting Dewey sit closest to him and asking, almost insistently, for the story of Azog's death. Gandalf, sitting on Bjorn's other side, filled in the gaps when needed. As they talked, Dewey learned more about Bjorn. He could not only transform into a giant bear, but also communicate with animals through growls. The estate was filled with animals that obeyed him: 4 white horses, a pack of gray dogs, a coal-black ram, several snow-white sheep, cows, chickens, mice, bees, all working in an orderly way under his direction. It was like an animal kingdom made flesh. Everyone was astonished. Dewey, especially, felt a pang of envy. Bjorn's abilities were reminiscent of the legendary druids. Not only could he change into a huge bear, but he also spoke to animals. Dewey, by contrast, had only mastered Parseltongue so far, a far humbler skill set. He had already begun the animagus process, but even if he succeeded, it would likely transform him into an ordinary animal. Bjorn's bear form, however, was not merely larger than usual. It had extraordinary strength and resilience, beyond that of normal bears. Dewey found himself wondering fiercely whether he could learn the secret of Bjorn's transformation. Could he combine it with his own animagus skill and become the first wizard to transform into a true magical animal? The thought excited him, but first, he had to master the animagus transformation itself.